Uh, Welcome everyone to this meeting of the New England Society of Professional Journalists. Our topic tonight is the topic that is on all of our screens. We're dealing with in all of our newsrooms and in the country, the issue of the protests after Mr. George Floyd was killed after a police officer, a white police officer, held his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes. And it's protests, of course, it's about that, but it's about much more than that. An issue that's been in this country for generations. And it's happening at a time where the country is also roiled with a pandemic that is also disproportionately affecting people of color, and economic upheaval, which also is pointing to the inequities that exist. So we're going to be talking with great reporters who are right now covering the story to give us their insights, to tell us about their experiences, what are some stories they have been covering, what they have seen, how it differs from what you might see on your screens, and what are some stories that perhaps aren't being told. My name is Mary C. Curtis. I'm going to be your moderator, but I'm really going to let folks really go on with their stories. And I am a journalist. I'm a columnist for Roll Call, and I also do commentary on television station that is here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm based, along with my office is in Washington, D.C., but I'm in Charlotte right now, staying at home. And it's also been a place where they've had quite a few demonstrations because every city has its own names of police and encounters with citizens of color. And I also do work with NPR and its affiliates. I'll be on their Charlotte affiliate tomorrow. My background is I've been a journalist for over 30 years, worked at places such as the New York Times, the Washington Post. I've written for their She the People blog. I was national political correspondent for AOL's Politics Daily. I spent some time in New England myself when I was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard, and a senior leader with the Op-Ed Project. And I teach thought leadership workshops all over the country and all over the world. So I'd like to have our panelists briefly introduce themselves. We have with us Branden Hunter. Do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, my name is Branden Hunter. I cover the Detroit neighborhoods, over 200 neighborhoods in the city of Detroit for the Detroit Free Press. I've been doing that since January when I got hired. Actually, I haven't been doing it at all because right after that, the coronavirus hit, and then we've had the protests and other issues been going on. So hopefully once everything's smooth over, we can get back to, covering over 200 neighborhoods in the city of Detroit, pretty much trying to, extract those Black stories, that Black culture in the city of Detroit, one of the Blackest cities in America, and it doesn't have a presence in our media. And so that's why I was hired to talk about what's going on in our communities outside of downtown and midtown here in Detroit.
Great. And then we also have Mr. Haisten Willis. Do you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. It's Haisten Willis.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, it's a little bit unusual name, family name. Anyway, I'm a freelance journalist based in Atlanta. I've been freelancing since 2006, right, for the Washington Post, U.S. News and World Report, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and several other outlets. For the George Floyd protest, I covered the protest in Atlanta on Sunday night, Monday night, and Tuesday night. Sunday night, I was detained by police, Atlanta police, for in search for weapons. Believed for several minutes that I was going to be spending the night in jail. Pretty scary experience that I went through there. But ultimately, I was let go and was able to continue reporting not only that night, but for the next 2 nights. I'm also pretty heavily involved with SPJ. I'm a past president of SPJ Georgia and a candidate this year for the national board of SPJ.
Great. That's cool. Yeah, and I forgot to mention that my coverage specialty is the intersection of politics, culture, and race, which is probably why I'm here. Haisten, I think when you talked about being detained by the police, I want to start out by asking you and then Branden to jump in about just what you've seen on the ground, and particularly, have you ever had something like this happen before? What is the relationship with the police and the press? And if you could talk a little bit about what it's like to be confronted in that way. If you could tell us, you know, a little bit of a step by step, and, you know, did you identify yourself? What happened?
Yeah, sure. No, it was definitely a new experience for me being approached by police like that as a journalist. I mean, I've not covered any protests before this one, so that was an experience as well. But when I was approached, Atlanta has had a 9 p.m. curfew. That curfew had gone into effect. This was about 9:30, and most people had left. There was not a whole lot going on. I was actually looking at my phone trying to figure out if I needed to go somewhere else to see if there was some action happening somewhere else in the city, or if I needed to just go home and write up, you know, what I had taken up for notes so far. I then looked up and noticed a pretty large group of police heading toward me. And I immediately stepped out into the light. I put my hands up so they could see that. And I said, I'm a journalist trying to identify myself. And things kind of went south pretty quickly. The Washington Post issued me a credential on my phone saying who I was. I was on assignment for them, and it had a cell phone number for the editor I was working for. So I tried to offer them that. I said, my credentials on my phone, I can pull it up for you. I had it kind of ready to go in case I needed it. But the police would not accept that. They said only a paper credential was valid. And really before I knew it, they took the phone out of my hands, took my pen out of my hands, and put me in handcuffs, in zip tie handcuffs. They then began searching me for weapons. And again, for several minutes here, I was under the impression, and I guess I was being arrested and was going to be taken to jail for being out after curfew. Luckily, they eventually relented. I had some business cards in my wallet. When they removed my wallet, I said, oh, there's business cards there, still trying to identify myself and convince them I was in fact the journalist. I'm not totally sure that's what changed their mind, but that's what it seemed to be. Once they saw the business cards, they seemed to kind of soften their demeanor. And within another 5 minutes after that, they cut the handcuffs off of me, and I was free to go. Again, it was a pretty harrowing experience, pretty scary.
Wow. Now, Branden, have you had any confrontations or interactions with the police covering this story that have put you on edge?
I have. I actually had a gun put on me on Saturday.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Maybe it was scene 2 of that night where police, the protester actually started to break into the Nike store here in Detroit, in downtown Detroit. They were unsuccessful, and they headed north on Woodward Avenue, which is our main street in the city. And police, they had their line set up maybe a block or 2 away. And then once again, they began deploying tear gas and rubber bullets. And so I ran back maybe about 2 blocks. And then that's when I met up with my colleagues who were all white. And we were on the corner of Gratiot and Woodward. And I'm wiping the tear gas out of my eye, because at that time, that second night, that was night 2 of the protest, I didn't have a gas mask. And I was wiping it out of my eye, and there's a video of it as well. The white officer with the gun with the shotgun walks right past my white colleagues and points the gun at me. And you can see me frantically screaming, I'm media, with my media pass, and they're all screaming media as well. And then once he looked at my media pass, he said, okay. And then 2 seconds later, someone else deployed another tear gas canister at us, and we all had to run. So as you can see through my story, DPD they were definitely ignoring who media were during that night, and they still are.
Do you feel that in the case of the Omar Jimenez in CNN, where he was arrested and his white colleague was not, and in this case, you seem to say that they came right at you, that this is a story where, the story is about police overstepping with communities of color. Do you feel that they were looking at you and targeting you perhaps because of your race?
100%. And another thing is, I'm 30. I'm a younger Black male. I'm one of the youngest people at the Free Press. I'm from the neighborhoods of Detroit, so I had on my Black Panther jacket. I had on from Jordan 1, right? And I fit in right with the protesters. If I didn't have my press credential on, you probably couldn't tell who I was. If I was a protester, or if I was media, because I don't look like everybody else. And it explains why he walked past everybody else who were white and with a camera and came right at me and pointed a gun at me. So I definitely believe it because of the color of my skin and how I look.
You fit the profile, right?
Fit the profile.
I want to just follow up a little bit. And as you said that you're from the neighborhood, and I can relate. I'm from West Baltimore, and you're from the area. Do you feel How do you feel that affects your reporting? Do you think it helps as far as sources, insights? Just, if you could tell me a little bit about, we've talked about newsrooms not being as diverse as they need to be, and that particularly where things are cutting back now, but how when you have different stories that you don't have all the perspectives. So if you could tell me how you think that affects the way you report this story.
This story or the stories, period?
Well, this story in particular, but kind of the your beat, as you said.
It definitely helps out. You know, Detroit is a predominantly African American city, 80%. So you definitely need those Black voices. And you know, me knowing everybody, you know, in the hood, like we say, it certainly helps out. And to give that perspective of what's going on, I saw a white reporter here in Detroit. He was reporting. He kept saying they're rioting. These are riots, and that's just not true. In '67, we had a riot. That was a riot, but we had no looting or damage here in Detroit. So you can't call it a riot. I mean, there were peaceful protests. Of course, you had a little violence with the tear gas and the guns and an arrest, but we got to tell the real narrative of what's going on. And this wasn't a riot. And see, that's 80% African American. So, you know, me being from the neighborhoods and knowing what's going on and how the people think and what they want, it definitely makes it easier for me to cover these stories and to get these sources and to tell the right narrative. And that's why I was hired at the Free Press, to tell a narrative of the people of Detroit, because I come from the city, I come from the neighborhoods, and we need to tell those stories of Black people in Detroit.
Do your white colleagues ask you questions and use you as a resource?
Oh, all the time. I was just running our Facebook Live 2 days ago and, giving a history of the East Side of Detroit. I'm from the East Side. We separate Detroit by East and West. And I was just giving an oral history of the East Side of Detroit, you know, what was built here, Henry Ford's first factory, you know, the high schools that were there, and people loved it, you know, because they're not from the city, and it gave them some insight on the makeup of our city, you know, that's outside of downtown and midtown, and, you know, what's really going on in our neighborhoods or our hood, as we call it. So, you know, they love it, and they love my presence there and what I bring to the scene.
Great. Now, Haisten, we've seen a lot of stories come out of Atlanta, all kinds. We've seen the police chief, I guess, the one walk with some of the protesters. We've also seen the case of the police officers fired and disciplined and looking into charges when they broke into the car of the young couple and dragged them out. Could you give us a little bit of what you are seeing on the ground, the kind of nuance you're seeing, and kind of take us there? Because as I said, we're seeing all different kinds of stories coming out.
Yeah, what's really impressed me, I guess, has been how passionate people who go down there have been. I've spoke with lots of protesters, some Black, a good number of white protesters as well. And just inevitably, when I talk to them and interview them, they tell me, just how fired up they are for what they're doing, you know, how inspired they have been by other protests, and there's just a lot of passion that goes into that. At the same time, it's definitely been very tense. I'm sure it's been tense in other cities as well. Again, my first time covering a protest, there have been fireworks being set off in the street, not small ones, like big, 4th of July type fireworks going off in the street. You know, sometimes just a few feet from me. It's very loud and really gets the adrenaline going. A big thing in Atlanta is they've been heavily enforcing this 9 p.m. curfew. They've been able to do that, but they're doing it with a lot of tear gas canisters, a lot of rubber bullets and that kind of thing. What's interesting is they're doing it starting at about 8:30. It's not like the curfew starts at 9, it kind of ends at 9 almost.
Mm-hmm.
They bring out, and you can see them, you can see the police all start putting on these gas masks right around 8:30, and then next thing you know, there's tear gas canisters just flying out into the streets. I definitely got some in my eyes and felt that sting. So it's very tense out there when you're covering the protests.
Yeah. You said it's the first time you've covered a protest. Have you seen what have you seen that perhaps has surprised you? That was a good story for you, something that was unexpected? Haisten?
I guess I will say I've been impressed with the number of white people coming out there and protesting. I've interviewed a few and been just impressed with their level of concern and their passion for being out there as well. That's been something that has impressed me. But again, I do have to admit, a lot of it has just been kind of the intensity of it has definitely made an impression on me as well. When you see it on TV, it looks intense, and it really is when you're down there, you're hearing the chants and just kind of seeing the action first person.
I want you both to be a little bit of a media critic. When the Freddie Gray protests happened in Baltimore, I noticed that, everybody ran to get the picture of the burning CVS, but there was so many other stories going on. The community center library across the street, where actually I got my library card when I was a kid, was open and nobody did anything to it, and the community went there. And it seems that, the cameras love the fires. What do you feel that what you've seen overall have been accurate portrayals of what's going on? Branden, maybe you could take this one, because I know you did a piece about, a teenager helping keep the peace. What do you feel about this, the peaceful protest versus the conflagration and how it's being covered?
Yeah, especially here in Detroit. Like I said, we haven't had any looting or damages to any buildings, even though those protesters tried that one night at the Nike store. Unlike other cities, like Atlanta and Minnesota, we've seen that damage and looting and fires, but we haven't had that here in Detroit, and we've reported that. Only thing we would call violence is the arrests, DPD, getting to altercations with people, physical altercations, and arresting them. The tear gas and rubber pellets, and then projectile that they're throwing. But that's really about it. And of course, we report that's going on. But for the most part, we've been reporting it fair, and there hasn't been any damage going on. And we talk about that every night, to report it right, not just report, sensationalizing it, trying to get more readers, about lying or about what's going on. So I think we definitely reported it fair, and we had those conversations every news meeting about what really went on and how we should report this here in Detroit.
How about you, Haisten?
Yeah, I can jump on that too. A lot of people actually that I've interviewed, once I tell them, I'm with the Washington Post and I want to talk to you, have actually complained to me about coverage that they've seen. They said, 90 whatever % of people out here are very much peacefully protesting. But when they go home from the protest and then read about it, they're reading about violence and property destruction and that kind of thing. So there is kind of a disconnect there. Atlanta had a good bit of damage on Friday. The CNN Center, of course, was damaged, and a lot of other businesses. But other than that, since that one night, it has been basically entirely peaceful. There has not been any major property damage or anything like that. So yeah, people have actually, again, they've told me, once they know I'm a journalist, they want to tell me how the coverage they feel is unfair.
That's interesting. I want to say for folks who are listening and watching that we will be answering some questions, and you can put your questions in the chat box. I want to make sure we get to them, so I might break in and add. We have a question from Jackie. How have the ethics changed in terms of using the names or posting the pictures of the protesters? When you're interviewing people, are people good with you naming them? Do they say, I don't want to use my name, or you can take a picture of me, or that kind of thing? How is that working out?
Here in Detroit, we pretty much had everybody that doesn't mind if we take a picture of them. We actually got a couple of stories of protests that we profiled. Tristan Taylor, I remember his name. The 16-year-old, Stephon Perez here in Detroit. That was the first night that we had a non-violent night, and he was actually leading the protest. He actually made them go home, and we did a whole profile on him as a 16-year-old. And so he was more than willing to give us his story and to talk to his grandmother and let us know where he's from as a 16-year-old and where he got that activism from. So for the most part, people are more than willing to let us take a picture of them and tell their story. I haven't had anyone tell me no, as far as taking their picture or getting their name down or even telling their story. So we've had pretty much 100% cooperation from people here in Detroit.
How about you, Haisten?
Yeah, same thing. No one has said no to me as far as when I approach them and say, "Can I interview you?" Which is surprising. If other things I've covered, a lot of people get kind of shy if they're going. Everyone has said yes, and they've said their age and where they're from and all those kind of details. without any problems. I haven't taken a ton of photos, but the ones I have taken have been of people who I did interview, and so they had already kind of given me basically permission. But most of them were really proud. They were excited, you know, that they would actually get their name in the paper, or potentially at least get their name in the paper. No one has said no. And as far as the ethics of it, you know, if you got pictures of people who were unidentified, I guess, I mean, they're out there protesting, you know, in pretty public places. In our case, Centennial Olympic Park is kind of the main area. So I don't know if it will be unethical, even if you didn't identify them, but I haven't done that myself.
Yeah, yeah. We have another question that have you read any stories in your area from other outlets that have surprised you with their coverage, or have others done well in conveying how peaceful some of these protests are or start out to be? Thank you.
I would definitely say it's pretty much been on the same level as coverage. I mean, we're all out there together: Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, Channel 2, 4, and 7 here, the Michigan Chronicle. So we actually all out there together seeing the same thing. So it's kind of hard for everybody to have different stories. I mean, as far as, you know, not being the same narrative. So I've pretty much seen the same coverage on all levels for all the, you know, the publications here, whether it's TV or it's print or online.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Haisten?
I would say about the same. Yeah, it's been pretty even coverage for most outlets. Yeah, everyone's kind of, I think, in it together. As far as when you see another media member out there too, you kind of stop and maybe talk to them for a second, see what they're up to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting. In Charlotte, a protest went by my house. It's in the suburbs because they've been very intentional about taking it to more affluent white areas. And it was very peaceful. I've noticed in some of it, though, it is very interesting when sort of the language that's used in reporting these. And I wonder if that's going to change. The whole sense of officer-involved shootings, you know, that people use when a police officer kills someone or shoots someone, and the press release says officer, and it's very much the passive voice too. George Floyd was killed, and so often newsrooms and people do take police reports as, you know, that's the official story, police said. But now we're seeing, like as in this case, the initial police report was very different from the video. And in other cases, you've seen that as well. So how do you think, or do you think that this will change how we cover policing in general and communities' interactions with police in general? Do you think we will be more skeptical with our investigative work than traditionally, and do you see it changing already? Yes, Branden, do you want to jump in?
You know,
and then
well, we have a whole program here at the Free Press, you know, where we get into diversity and how media is covered. We took an audit of our news stories, and we wanted to see how we presented Black men, and most of the stories came out that they were either about a crime, a murder, or a robbery, something like that. You know, so we wanted to definitely change that narrative and not just talk about those stories. And even with the police, you know, how we cover the police here, we changed that as well. If something was about race, not saying racially charged, but really calling it what it is, you know, calling a spade a spade. And so we really pride ourselves on that and getting the story right and not beating around the bush around these stories. If it was a story about race, it was racial, then we say that, not that it was racially charged.
how about you, Haisten?
Yeah, I like what you're saying about, you know, the terms officer-involved shooting and the passive voice of Floyd was killed. I mean, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, going even beyond policing. I know we're all under tight deadlines and stuff, but taking the words that are used in press releases and kind of letting those through without doing a lot of checking, I guess, or thinking about, you know, how that comes across. The officer-involved shooting, I mean, to me is pretty egregious to use that at all. It doesn't really even describe what happened. So yeah, I do think we should be very diligent. I hope it would shine more of a spotlight on that kind of thing when you're reporting on this, you know, what really is the best language to use, really thinking about that. What is an accurate statement? I think that happens a lot with police and with other areas as well.
Yeah. We have another question from Abby, I think it is. There has been a lot of interesting discussion about looting and its merits. Some people see it as an important form of protest, while others see it as immoral. How are your news organizations considering this in coverage of protests? And I would add to that, you know, we have all these theories about some people are criminal looters, some people are instigators from left or white or right-wing groups. So if you could talk about the protesting and then the looting piece and how that they're reporting that and how it's fitting into your coverage, that would be great. Branden? And then,
Well, we haven't had any looting, you know, or any of that.
Yeah.
So we've had instigators that we talked about a lot outside Detroit. Detroit is 80% African American. Like Hastings said, most of the crowd is white, predominantly white. So where do they come from? And so we wrote a couple pieces about them coming from outside of Detroit. We had someone come who got arrested. Came from as far as Tennessee.
wow.
So they explained why they're here. They're here. They're probably here to instigate. The other night we had 84 arrests here in Detroit. The DVD chief Craig says 70% were white and they were from outside of Detroit. So we do have a load of instigators here. Just trying to start stuff here in Detroit, but they haven't gotten around to the looting. And I think an interesting piece is when you go through Detroit, you see people putting plywood on their windows.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1967, and during the riot there, Black business used to put Right Soul Brother on their windows to let you know that it was Black owned. A couple of Black owned businesses here in Detroit had Black owned on their windows to let people know that it was Black owned, just in case so they won't break in. So, you know, thankfully we didn't have all that looting and damage to those businesses, but we have had instigators and no looting or no damages.
Yeah. How about you, Haisten?
Yeah, I've got a lot of different thoughts on this. Georgia has talked about the two that we've had out-of-state instigators who have come in. A lot of states have said that, and I guess I just don't know exactly what to think about because there's been protests in every state. I don't get exactly why people would come from a different state to a different protest. I have not seen any of that type of instigation, which is good. I'm reading my notes. I know what I wrote. As far as the looting thing, I mean, I guess I try to, you know, just report what happened, and I don't know, you know, try not to get into the value judgment of if the looting is a positive or a negative for the movement or for the message. But I did have kind of a dilemma the other night that this made me think of was Tuesday night. Atlanta had a bunch of property damage on Friday, but has not had much since then. But Tuesday night, a Foot Locker was broken into. It was one store. It was in downtown Atlanta. It was not even really extensively damaged. I don't think that much was even taken out of, but it was broken into. So I had to decide, am I going to even mention this in my story? It's kind of minor, but it is, you know. So that was kind of an ethical dilemma for me, if I mention that or not. I did mention it, but I kind of put it low in the story and made a short sentence. You know, there was one break-in at a Foot Locker, and kind of left it at that. But it is that can be tough. You know, how much do you focus on it if there is some property damage?
Yeah. You know, this year, you know, the New York Times, last year in their project on the 1619 project, they tried to bring history into putting coverage into perspective. And so part of this story, of course, is George Floyd, but so much of it is about big issues from systemic racism, criminal justice reform, you know, the role of the, you know, military in squashing these things. And so, you know, you have to do the daily reporting, obviously, but how much of a place do you think that kind of broader perspective belongs in these stories to explain them? And how do you put them in there in a way that you're not, you know, doing a college lecture, but, you know, making sure that your readers know that it's, because I've heard some people say, you know, well, George Floyd isn't even from Minneapolis, it is even from my city, but it is about something bigger. So how do you do that in your stories, bringing in that greater perspective while being true to, you know, reporting what's going on the ground?
I think the easiest way is to report what you see out there. And it's more than just, I think you mentioned it earlier, it's more than just people protesting for George Floyd, right? It's for the other Black, you know, women and men killed by the hands of white officers like a Breonna Taylor, the Tamir Rices, Even here in Detroit, Aina Jones Stanley was a 7-year-old killed in 2010 by a white officer. You know, Malice Green killed in 1992 by 2 white officers. And people unearthing those stories, and we talking about police brutality. Also talking about gentrification. People talking about that here in Detroit, which is a huge problem here in Detroit. You know, white supremacy. We talking about that, and how can we, you know, break that cycle? So there were a lot of people out here protesting a lot of issues. It wasn't just police brutality. It wasn't just white supremacy. It was a lot of issues out here, and they had it on their sign. So I think that was, for us, the easiest way to, you know, add that in there. What's really going on in this country? It wasn't just one man dying, sparking all of this. You know, it all came to a culmination, and you know, people are fed up, and that's why you see all these protests around the country. Not just George Floyd. It started it, but it's deeper than that.
Yeah, it is. As I said, I mean, in Charlotte, you had Jonathan Farrell, the young man who was looking after he was in an accident. You had Keith Lamont Scott, which was when we had the last demonstrations. Yeah, so it's Dacarius Franklin just fairly recently. So it's kind of sad. Every city has its names, you know, fill in the blank, unfortunately. Yeah, how about you, Haisten? How do you kind of put the context in your pieces?
Yeah, I mean, you do that, I think, through the details of the things you see. One thing that I saw I thought was very powerful was in Centennial Olympic Park, which is where kind of in the center of the protest, someone set up, it was 15 crosses, white crosses set up in a row with the names of Black men and women who have been killed by police, which was a very powerful symbol, and a few different places have reported on that. And like Branden was saying, yeah, this goes a lot further than George Floyd. There was a murder in Brunswick, Georgia, closer to here. This got attention. So yeah, I mean, this has been going on, as you know, for decades. It's not just this one incident.
Yeah. Also, our leaders, thank goodness, they're putting some links to stories up on the chat. And also, before we end, I'm going to ask all the panelists where they can see your work, and also where you can follow them on Twitter and in their social media profiles. And I'll do that too. But I also wanted to say this is all happening, of course, in the midst of a COVID pandemic. And we've seen a lot of protesters out there, sometimes social distancing, sometimes not, sometimes wearing a mask, sometimes not. And then also we have the numbers that show the huge amounts of unemployed now, people hurting, particularly Black and brown folks, and inequities in the healthcare system. Do you kind of take note of that, particularly like the COVID, when you're looking at the demonstrations in your reporting? How has that affected it at all? And do you feel apprehensive when you're out there in these crowds, talking to people and covering things, and you're thinking about your health as well?
Mm-hmm. You know, we're still in the midst of the COVID outbreak. You know, we've had some lifting of the rules here by our Governor Whitmer, but people pretty much we're still in the midst of it. So, but pretty much everybody out there is wearing a mask. It's hard to social distance when you have 1,500 people out there, so that's non-existent. But I'm always wearing a mask, gloves if I can, not staying in the middle of the crowd, maybe staying on the side. You know, but for the most part, everybody's out there is wearing a mask, and, you know, being safe as possible. You know, still going through the COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And I'm not afraid to go out there. Obviously, I've been out there all 7 days that we've had it here in Detroit, and I plan to get constant testing as well.
You're young, Branden.
Right.
How about you, Haisten?
I got to say, when I'm out there covering the protests, it's not really something I'm thinking about that much. I guess that's a confession I'm making. A lot of folks I'm talking to are not wearing masks. I've been wearing one mostly because I don't want to let somebody else that I'm approaching, if they say, I don't want to talk to you, you're not wearing a mask, or I don't make sure that they're okay with me approaching them. So I wear it for that reason. But I don't really even take note if the person's wearing a mask or not. I'm looking at their sign, I'm looking at what they're saying, you know, whatever might kind of catch my eye, picking out who to interview. I know that is definitely still an issue. I'm not saying it isn't, but when I'm out there, I'm really more focused on the story and the protest at hand.
Now, tell me what you're working on now. What is the story you're looking at that you want to do? Any things in your head? I know, Branden, you did, as you said, a great piece on such a young person who is such a leader. What are you looking at now?
We actually have a march tomorrow on the Belle Isle Bridge. That's we have a Detroit River here, and it's a big island. It's actually the largest city park in the world. It's called Belle Isle. It's here in Detroit on our river, and it's a bridge that goes to it called the Belle Isle Bridge. And we have some millennials, community leaders and politicians leading the march, and they're trying to mimic the March on Selma on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and so they're based it around that. And I think it's dope to for us to be 20 and 30 to tap into that history that happened over 50 years ago with Dr. King and those people, marching in Selma, and they're trying. And so we're working on that tomorrow to give a historical piece and how it ties into Detroit as well.
Fantastic. How about you, Haisten?
Yeah, life of a freelancer. I covered the protest earlier in the week for the Washington Post. After Tuesday night, Atlanta hadn't really made national news anyway for a few days. So they said, keep an eye on it. If anything big comes, we'll call you back out. But I've been kind of relieved of those duties for the moment. So again, I'm used to that by now. You jump in and out of stories as a freelancer, which I don't always necessarily mind. But if I could, I guess, pick and choose something. One thing that got a lot of attention on Friday night was that the CNN Center was damaged. There's kind of a landmark in Atlanta, this big CNN letters outside. Those were spray painted, and the windows were smashed there. And I would, even if I had to interview them anonymously, I would love to speak to the people that did that. There's been discussion of, were they attacking CNN itself? Did they see CNN as a symbol of the problem? Or was it just something that was in, because a lot of other windows were smashed, other hardware stores and things that weren't anything like that. But I would love to know their motivation. Why were you smashing the windows at the CNN Center?
Yeah.
Did you feel that was important to get the message across, to make sure CNN took notes? Or, I would just love to know their thoughts when they were doing that.
Yeah. Or it could be somebody who listens to all the attacks on CNN as fake news and thought, oh, well, you don't even know what's going on.
Absolutely.
What's been your favorite story and angle that you've reported on? I have a great one. What advice would you give to those thrown at one of these protests for the first time, especially if they're concerned about the police presence? Branden.
A journalist?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So we had a few people. We had a few people out there, first time journalists or, first time being in a protest. Actually, it was my first time being in a protest. So I got thrown into the fire, and I think it's gained from experience. That second night is when I had the gun pulled on me. We had rubber bullets shot at us. I had a guy next to me get hit with a rubber bullet, and I took a picture of the damage. So I had that in my mind mentally of how to prepare to stay in groups. So any of us at the Free Press or I will bring extra supplies for other reporters. It didn't matter what publication you work for. I didn't care. I brought extra helmets and extra goggles and gas masks for everybody to make sure everyone was safe. And I would just let them know about my experience on what to do and what not to do. And I would tell them, if you were scared, I totally understand. If you don't want to be out here, then I totally get it, because it's not for everybody. And so it's just really pretty much learning from my personal experience on what to do and what not to do.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think you have to also know. I mean, when I was at Keith Lamont Scott, the tear gas just kind of destroyed me. I mean, you can't play with that. And then I started to hear gunshots, and I was like, oh, okay.
Time to go.
I found out I was very near somebody that was shot and killed, actually. But my cousin kids me about, you think you're invulnerable if you're a journalist, and you're not. How about you, Haisten, as someone who actually had to cover this protest for the first time as well, and just jump right into a situation that was in many ways a lot more volatile than Branden's? What would be your advice? What was in your toolkit, and what did you learn on the ground that you wish you had known?
Well, the first thing I would say is I would encourage someone to do it. I mean, if you really just don't want to, of course, not. But one thing I've been afraid of all these reports of journalists being pepper sprayed and tear gassed and arrested is that other journalists would be afraid to go out there. That's really been something I've been afraid of happening. We need to be out there telling this story. So I would encourage you. It is a little bit scary, a little harrowing, but to go do it, to at least give it a shot. Let's see. So I called a good friend of mine on my way down there who had been out there before, and I said, what should I know? And he gave me some good advice. Just be aware of your surroundings, of course. Like if you're going to take notes, you might want to kind of go, a little bit away from the crowd to write some things down. But definitely be aware of what's going on around you. I know me, for example, when I saw the police the first night putting on the gas mask, I'm like, okay, they're probably going to start spraying some stuff pretty soon here. So I looked the other way down the road and kind of planned my escape route, right? Once these canisters come out, I'm going to stay here as long as I can. But that's the way I'm going to run, right? Once that happens. So, just being aware of what's going on. Do your best. If you do feel in danger, hold up the badge, let them know you're a journalist, but do know that this isn't necessarily always going to get you out of trouble, as we've both seen.
Mm-hmm. What story are journalists missing? What is the story that maybe is not being told? That there's a little bit of a disconnect. Is there anything or any angle or any piece of it that you've seen either the context is off or that you would like to see more of and that you might even explore, Branden?
Well, I actually kind of thought about it, and my colleague already did it. But the Black women leading the marches, we had a few of them out there leading the marches over the last 7 days. They wrote a profile about them on Detroit Free Press. I believe it was today, actually online. So I think that's important as well. It's not just the men out there leading, or the men out there getting killed by police. We talk about Breonna Taylor, who was murdered as well, and so there's a campaign to remember her name. So I think just remembering the women that have been lost and those who are leading the march and have the courage to go out there and let their voices be heard. And we did one of those stories for the Free Press today.
Oh, great. How about you, Haisten?
I don't think anyone has done this, or I haven't seen it, but maybe hearing perspective of people who had protested, like in the '60s in the civil rights movement, especially being here in Atlanta, home of Martin Luther King Jr. When I go to these protests, it's definitely a young crowd. I'm 34 and feel like I'm older than most people who are out there. It's definitely younger people who are doing this. So I would love to hear the perspective of more older people who protested back in the day. See what they think about it. That's something that came to my mind anyway.
Right.
That's very interesting because I'm the youngest of 5 children, and my 3 oldest siblings were involved in the civil rights movement. I had a brother that was arrested twice at a sit-in, and I do think when people talk about it, particularly people who feel that it's too boisterous and things are they have a feeling of this, everything was all sweet and nonviolent or whatever. And I say nothing was nonviolent, because even though the marchers weren't doing a lot, there was violence done upon them. It's not as though the police just let them go, and that's what got the attention of the country. And also, I hear people saying things like, how can somebody bring their children? And the whole realization that there were a lot of children on the front lines at these times, which didn't stop people from tear gassing and beating them, during the march. And for the most part, like I said, when I went to the one outside, there were many people of all races, and they had their children, and they wanted them to see that as well. So I do think that's an interesting point, Haisten, that people who either didn't care about those marches then, or disapproved, or weren't around, somehow have this image of what it was like. Like Martin Luther King had a couple of great marches, and then all of a sudden you had civil rights. That is so, distorted, and that I do think a lot of journalism misses context, and, even calling politicians to account when they have a statement that they had a different statement 2 years ago, that kind of thing. I do think we can all, and that's not, I write columns, but basically they're reported. So just to point out things, it's not me kind of making stuff up. And I feel sometimes that, journalists kind of fall back on cliches or hazy memories of things that we could just report on a little bit more and give it, historical context. And I think that would be a great story, both of those, the women, because women also were very involved in the original civil rights movement that they didn't get, so this would be, that's the historical context. It's like, this is nothing new, this always was. And they always didn't get the attention they probably should have. Mm-hmm. And the same thing about what the marches actually look like. So, so also I wanted to, we're about 10 minutes to go. So I I didn't want to do all the talking. So for both of you, for anybody, if they have any questions, to make sure they put them in the chat box. And for both of you to also share some things about your experience that we haven't talked about that you want to share. Branden?
You know, one thing about this is like, this is really, I know, got have helped me get a lot of national exposure. You know, I was talking on CNN this week, NBC. I was also on NPR, you know, BBC. So I got a lot of exposure, you know, for myself, just talking about my personal experiences and helping my brand out. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've gained from this, and a lot of exposure, you know, a lot of exposure, a lot of experience, you know, covering these protests, and so that when it happens again, that, you know, I'll be ready and to tell others of my experiences.
Would you like to tell people where they can find some of your work, share some of your social media?
Yeah, so of course I work for the Detroit Free Press, so that's freepress.com. You type in my name to find it, Branden Hunter, that's Branden, Hunter, Hunter. My social media, I can be found on Twitter at just call me B Hunt, JUSTCALLMEBHUNT. I know it's super long, but just type in Branden Hunter. I'm verified. You will see it pop up for the Detroit Free Press.
Great. How about you, Haisten? First of all, share anything that we haven't talked about so far, and let people know where they can find your work. Each of us have a story that's up in the chat box, by the way. So, yeah.
Let's see. I'm not as active on social media, I guess, as I probably should be. But honestly, if you want to find my work, I would just Google my name, Haisten Willis, Haisten. Last name Willis. Do like a Google News search for that, and you'll find the latest things that I've worked on. I have also gotten a lot of exposure out of being detained by the police. I guess I'm not totally sure how to feel about that, but I've done a lot of interviews this week. You know, I'm part of this panel right now. So I guess that has been good for my career. You could say it's been an interesting week for me, for sure.
Yeah, great. I have also, last night I was on for 2 hours, like I said, with China Global Television Network, almost an hour and a half. I'll be doing something out of Canada, and also been on a lot of things almost every day. The world is watching this. I think that's quite interesting too. That is a global, not only does every country have its own person with encounters with police officers, but they are looking at the United States and they're not liking what they have seen. But I've traveled to England and Germany and other places, and you know, and speak to people of color, whether they're of Turkish descent in Germany or African students or whatever. And they all say, if you look at the criminal justice system, you know, Black people, Arab people, people of color are represented disproportionately. My work, I have a piece today, you can see it roll call, but my Twitter is at mcurtisnc3. And I have a website, which is my name, which is maryccurtis.com, where you could see where to reach me on Facebook, LinkedIn. My Instagram is maryc.curtis. And as I said, the world is watching. It's very interesting. We have another question. Is there something you wished you'd known that you didn't know until after about covering these things? Yeah, from Susan.
I wish I would have known how far the protesters were going to walk. I mean, we walked 7 miles, and I'm a runner, so it's easy for me. But still, I've walked a good 10 miles a day with these protests. So, and most of them, the protests, they didn't even know where they was going. They just wanted to walk. So, I wish I would have known how far they would have walked. That we could have planned it from there. Because just walking 7 miles, sometimes walking away from downtown with no ride to get there. So,
well, what did you do?
Our colleagues had to come get us.
Oh.
So we walked 7.3 miles from downtown, and we had no way to get back.
I hope you had comfortable shoes. I hope you had comfortable shoes. Yeah, that's what being young really helps. It really helps. How about you, Haisten? What do you wish you'd known?
Well, I guess I gotta say, I wish I had known that the Atlanta police would not accept a digital credential and issue to me on my phone. If I had known, I guess I could have, gone and found a printer somewhere and gotten. I'm still not really convinced that would have made any difference, but that's the first thing that came to my mind for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think coming out of this, that we are going to have more discussions about police interactions with the press, because it seems that there have been a lot of arrests, people pepper spraying, and we've had that here in town too, attacking the press, people saying I'm press, and they'll say I don't care who you are. At the backdrop that we do have, I don't want to get political, but a leadership that says that we're the enemies and that we're putting out fake news. How do you see that relationship moving on? Because, you know, as someone who covers political conventions and things like that, there's always a lot of interactions with security, with police, with Secret Service. And so there is the potential for really some problematic interactions, even arrests. What do you see about that in the future? What would you like to see happen?
I'm actually on a committee here in Detroit, helping out on how the interactions between the Black residents, with, again, 80% Black in Detroit, interactions with police officers here in Detroit. We haven't had many incidents like around the country, but we do have our own here. We talk about John Stanley and Malice Green. And so these protests really feel different, from the protests during Ferguson, where we just had it in Ferguson, because they're spread around the country, so people are really feeling it. And I do think that there will be a discussion on how, people, especially Black people and people of color, deal with police around the country. And obviously with the, we can have a roll call of many men and women that have died by the hands of white officers. And there needs to be a discussion on how they handle those situations and what needs to be done about it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's true. And as a Black journalist, when you say you were targeted, I mean, I've covered these stories, but as a journalist, but I'm an African-American woman with a Black son who has been profiled. He actually took a ticket to court before. And I do think our colleagues need to understand that too, that it's not just we're covering a story, but this is our life. And it's also a certain amount of trauma, because I've said these videos are good because they are proof, but at the same time, it's frustrating that people needed proof because just our witness wasn't enough. And that every time you show this, it's kind of like a pornography in a way. It's Black death, it's Black pain. And it truly is traumatic. So many people I know can't even watch them. And so, yeah, that's something to think of. How about you, Haisten, as someone who actually was stopped by the police? Do you think that that's another discussion that we're going to need to be having about First Amendment and
Interaction between police and the press?
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know exactly what the solution is there, but obviously there's a group, I can't remember the name right now, that's tracking the number of incidents between press and the police and also protesters, but it has, the majority have been the police, and it was, I think, 280 incidents across the country this afternoon.
Wow.
That's only been in like a 2-week time period. So I do feel like, that there's a lot of discussions that take place. I don't know if this is just through a whole bunch of panel discussions between community leaders, journalists, and police, but I guess I do suspect the police seem to think of journalists as being, one with the protesters.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's definitely a big issue.
Yeah, maybe Haisten too. I mean, you talked about being a very active member of the SPJ. If you could talk about the benefits of being an SPJ member, particularly being a member of a group when these things are going on, and it is an SPJ event, and talk about that. And also, both of you can talk about any other journalism organizations that you recommend that have been helpful. So, Haisten, you want to talk a little bit about SPJ?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up and for asking that question. Yeah, SPJ has been just huge for me, really in general, but here particularly. And as a freelancer, you can feel like you're on your own sometimes. So SPJ is kind of my home base. That's kind of what I consider like my coworkers, you could say. And in this particular instance, SPJ has just been huge for me. What happened? A friend of mine who knew I was down there saw my detainment live on TV. The CBS affiliate in town was showing apparently just me being detained for a good 4 or 5 minutes on TV. So he has done some stuff for the Post. He, before I was even released, had already called the Post to let them know what was going on, and had already contacted people at SPJ. So not long after I got out, I actually had to start, I saw a text message from him. I had to call him and other people and say, call the dogs a little bit. I'm out. I'm not actually in jail right now.
Yeah.
But that said, SPJ has continued to support me throughout the week. The Georgia chapter of SPJ, along with some other groups, put out a statement in support of myself, along with another journalist named Alyssa Pointer, who's a photographer for the AJC. She was detained the next day after me, but they put out that statement in support of me. Patty Gallagher, the national president of SPJ, has talked to me and had some discussions. They've just been hugely supportive. I've just gotten, emails and messages from members that I know supporting me, that which has been really great. And yeah, SPJ has been invaluable to me.
Great. How about you, Branden? We talked earlier, you were getting ready to go, as I was, to the National Association of Black Journalists conference. And are you members of different groups that have been valuable in your career?
Of course, NABJ, of course, NABJ Detroit. If you're a Black journalist in the country, you're probably a part of NABJ, and you probably know each other or know someone who knows that person as well, and so that's just how it is. But NABJ has been very instrumental in my career, especially those in Detroit, the older journalists, giving me wisdom, giving me help, giving me contacts. And I recommend it for any journalist of any age that's African American to be a part of NABJ.
Yeah, that's true. And you don't have to be Black to be a member of NABJ. You just have to believe in the mission. But it is good sometimes to go to these conventions, particularly when they're from areas that don't have a lot of diversity on your outlet, so you can get with people and say, oh, I guess I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm also a member of SPJ, actually, NABJ, and Journalism and Women's Symposium, JAWS, that's called, and that's women, and that's been very helpful as well. They're very supportive. They have what they call camps, not conventions, and it's a lot of networking. And I do think when you're in this profession, to have that support from people who are going through that and can give you tips and can support you when things are going down, it's really great. And they even have like freelancers unions too to help out, because that's a really tough road right now, particularly in getting insurance and things like that. So I want to thank SPJ for having us. I think we're at the 8 o'clock mark. I learned a lot from our wonderful panelists. Thank you all for the great questions. And thank you for inviting all of us. And it was great. Good luck in your reporting. Take care of yourselves, all of you on the call. And I'll probably be reaching out to y'all on your social media as well to keep track of all your great work. So thank you, Adam, and SPJ New England, and all your members.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.